Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to another edition of Ubrix Sessions. Today I've got Alistair Ford joining us. Thank you so much for taking the time, Alistair. You've got such an interesting background from climate modelling to geospatial data and planning. For anyone who is watching who might not know your work, can you just give us a quick snapshot of what it is you focus on, what your remit is?
Yeah, of course. So I work at Newcastle University in the School of Engineering. I am not an engineer. I am a spatial data analyst, really. So I look at maps and map data and try to use that kind of data about location to work with people like engineers to tackle some of the problems that they face. So my background, I did a degree in GIS, Geographical Information Systems, which are computer software to analyze maps, for those who don't know what they are. And I've since applied that kind of spatial modeling, that skill set to all kinds of challenges, as you say, from kind of sustainable transport through to climate change impacts, and increasingly urban planning or land use planning in general. Yeah.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you've got a really holistic perspective of the world from your side of things. When we're focusing and we're talking about the housing and construction sector, what jumps out to you from a data and a climate perspective? Do you think we're getting it right? Do you think that there's some things being missed?
I think there are lots of pressures on land and on planners and on housing developers. Every time you read the news, there's something about, yesterday it was about flood risk and the fact that lots of our new homes are going to be exposed to flood risk in the future. Sometimes it's about transport and the fact that we're not building homes in places that allow people to walk or cycle and travel sustainably. Sometimes it's about protecting land where we grow food from being lost to development. Sometimes it's about nature and biodiversity and ensuring that housing doesn't cause the loss of rare snails, as Rebecca Rees was talking about, Rachel Rees was talking about last week. So there's a lot of challenges, and I think that holistic view is important. So that this idea of systems thinking, that everything is a system, everything interacts with everything else. And ultimately, only by trying to think about how the parts all fit together can you really make the best decisions. So for me, in the planning and housing sector, the challenge is there probably isn't the best place to build houses, but there are places where you could maximize all the things you want to maximize and minimize most of the things you want to minimize and still deliver the amount of housing that we need to meet the requirements that the country has. And I think that's where using data comes in to try. I wouldn't suggest that data replaces planners. I think planners have years of expertise and knowledge, and that human aspect is very important. I'm not advocating that AI replaces humans completely, but I think the more we can use data to kind of shortcut the process in a way and get us to the best places that we might be looking for development, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting that you say that in terms of the power of doing more planning work up front. So just thinking back to the first conversation that we both had together about your work with Gateshead Council on figuring out where homes should go. So factoring in those things like energy, transport, facility access. What did that exercise teach you? Did it teach you anything, or were you more the educator? And what was a surprising reaction, do you think?
Well, I think it was very much a mutual learning experience because I am not a planner. I'm not trained in planning. I'm trained in working with data. So learning from the planners about how planning works, for me and the way that I came at this was, well, we have all this data. If we just use it in the right way, that will, help us to make these decisions. And then I realized that often the planning system is reactive, not proactive. The developers will say, we would like to build here, please. And then it's up to the planners to say, why not? Which to me seemed the wrong way around. It was a learning process, that what are the limits on what data can do in that environment, but also how we could move forward together by using some of these kind of geospatial analytics approaches that we've been developing over the years to at least have more informed conversations about locations of housing in Gateshead. So it was a kind of iterative process where we met many times, tried out different things, particularly the kinds of outputs we could generate, because not everyone understands complex maps. I might think in maps, but I realize that many people don't. So thinking about, well, how do we message this, and how do we use these kinds of tools, not as a decision-making thing where we say, there's the answer, the computer says, build there, but as a conversational tool to say, here are two options that we've simulated that take different things into priority. Which do you prefer? Which more aligns with your values and your politics and your top priorities? And then how do we roll this forward from there? So it was very much we learning from each other, and eye-opening for me as to how the planning system in this country does, or many times doesn't, work.
Yeah, it's an important conversation, and one that I seem to have every week with different people from different perspectives and backgrounds. I think from the conversations that I have had, it's more how long things take to get approved or declined, and then the reasons behind that aren't necessarily as clear or as transparent as they potentially could be. Do you think that that could be due to old habits or a cultural thing, or like what I'm trying to get at is, are there any trends, or is there anything that you think potentially gets in the way of the planning side of the industry?
I think the complexity of it, the legislation and the number of things that planners have to consider when they're considering applications is something that definitely gets in the way. I mean, that's partly why we were coming at this from a more kind of data-driven approach, where we wanted to, the more you can get up front, do a kind of pre-screening, then it removes some of the ambiguity in a way. So, if someone sees a digger appear at the end of their street on a field and starts building a housing estate, if they could at least understand why that place was chosen, because it is, close to public transport, it's within walking distance of amenities, it's not prime agricultural land, it's not at risk for flooding, etc., then that goes some way, I think, to unblocking some of the opposition to house building. Because a lot of this, I think, from the politician's perspective, is fear of voters being annoyed at decisions they make. So that kind of, and then the more you've got then the backing of, here is the justification and the logic behind why this is the best place for housing in our borough or in our city, then I think that gives some air cover to the people who are making these decisions to say, well, we've done lots of analysis on this actually, and this is why this is a good place to deliver 500 new homes.
Yeah, it's it does sound like, the more I speak and the more I kind of pick through all of the different elements that go into planning, it sounds like such a difficult process to kind of figure out. So there's so many moving parts to it, and you just think that there's a piece of land that looks great, it's pretty, why can't we just build on that? But actually, it's when you scrape the surface, there's so much that goes into it that actually it does make sense when people explain it. It's just on the surface, it doesn't seem like there's that there should be those blockers in place. But I think when we're talking more globally about things like cities and things, as opposed to just developments, we're thinking about things like air quality, flooding, those are all things that directly impact where and how we build. So do you think then that we should be using that kind of data a lot more, and how should we be using that data?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got increasing amounts and access to geospatial data. So data about where things are, whether it's soil quality, whether it's geothermal energy potential, whether it is air quality. We've got information about, population trends, all kinds of things that we can put into the mix. And now with the advent of things like AI and machine learning, we can start to pile all of these things into decision-making approaches that will then, and I love to use the word optimize, because often there isn't an optimum solution, but we can get towards a set of solutions that has narrowed down that field by using that kind of data. So I think traditionally, you know, when a housing development or any other kind of development is proposed, people would go away and do a flood risk assessment, they go away and do a transport assessment, they do all of the different things that need to be done. The more of those are done up front to kind of pre-select where the optimum places are, the faster the process. Now, clearly, what does that do to the market for developers? Because if there are only certain bits of land that meet the criteria, then does that mean that suddenly those are at massive premium and everything else is worthless?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is where, as an academic, I really don't have to think about those complicated problems of economics.
That's not your headache.
Someone who runs a housing development company might have different thoughts on this.
Yeah.
But, you know, ultimately, we're trying to tackle a lot of these kind of big problems that we're facing as humanity, you know, climate change, biodiversity loss, flood risk, health, physical inactivity, you know, all of these things that are a result of the way we've been doing things for decades. And if we don't, you know, there's the old Chinese proverb that if you don't change direction, you'll end up where you're going. Yeah. And, you know, that's the danger. We can see that there are problems with the current kind of patterns of urban development and the way we're providing homes for people, and there must be better solutions. I guess that's why you're in the business you're in.
Well, absolutely. I think there's a lot to unpick with your answer there. I think if we maybe focus on the sustainability angle, so if we're serious about building homes that are sustainable, but not just sustainable now, sustainable long term, where do we start? Like, do you feel like this should be something that is informed by data, and can data inform the long-term sustainability of a piece of land and everything around it? Or should it be something else entirely, the energy source, for example, the materials, or is it everything combined?
I think data gives you a window into many of those aspects. As, you know, sustainability, the danger is we just get carbon blindness, and we're fixated on CO2 emissions and net zero. And there are so many other aspects to sustainability, including the economic and social aspects. You know, we need homes that people feel comfortable in and enjoy living in. We need homes that are affordable, and a market that allows us to build those homes, whether that's in the public sector or in the private sector. We need, you know, the economic and social sustainability alongside the environmental sustainability. And a lot of these challenges are long term. So we do, you know, when we build houses now, they're going to be around, if we do it right, for 50 or 100 years. And in that time, you know, the climate is going to change. So we need to think about, are those homes fit for a world where global temperatures are 2 degrees warmer than they are today? We need to think about, are those homes safe for future floods, not just current flood risk and future rainfall extremes? And we need to think about, how do those homes contribute to the long-term recovery of biodiversity and nature that has suffered a huge hammering in this country over the last century or so. And I think there are very good examples of these things being done. And what data does is gives us a way of measuring how far we're going and how well these things are performing. And the kind of work that I do is trying to give us a bit of a future-looking approach. So you can kind of try and use these models to predict, will this development meet the goals that we have set ourselves? Will this development be resilient to future climate change? Based on the best knowledge we have. You know, all models are wrong, but some models are useful. So we can run computer simulations and we can get some better insights. It's not going to tell us to predict the future, but it will at least tell us if we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that kind of leads into my next question. You've mentioned tool that you might use, and the sector obviously uses very different ones depending on the roles within. But do you think that there are any tools, or are there any tools that are really exciting you in terms of AI predictive modeling that could genuinely change how we plan and build moving forward?
I think, yeah, there are a lot of people, including ourselves, working on these kinds of sustainable planning type tools. I'm involved in a project at the minute working on how the UK's land can be used to meet net zero targets and meet biodiversity targets and protect us from future climate risks. Sometimes these things are in conflict. So if we can run thousands and thousands and thousands of permutations of the future and measure each of those permutations against our priorities, and then find the best ones, the best 50 or 100, then we can narrow down the space quite considerably by using things like AI. And if we can train AI to do that for us, we could speed it up even further. Now, I would never say just let AI do it, but AI can help us along the way by searching through vast quantities of data, and we've got more data now than we ever have. It's just a question of how we use and analyze that data for social, economic, and environmental good. And I think that's what many people are trying to do, including us here at Newcastle University.
It's an exciting project. Do you have any publications or anything on that as you sit here today, or are they to be?
Not as yet.
Confirmed?
We've got two in the pipeline that should be out
Okay.
fairly soon, describing some of the tools we built. And then the project looking at the UK's land use has got another 18 months or so to run. So
Right. Okay.
we're at the point of starting to generate outputs now, which we've then got to analyze, and then we've got to write, and then we've got to put it into the publishing machine, and eventually a paper pops out. But I am a firm believer that academics traditionally have done a lot of their work in journal papers that nobody reads, whereas I think getting out to talk to people and writing blogs and articles and doing things like talking to you today are a very important part of the communication of what we're doing, and working with practitioners and decision makers as well, not just being stuck in our ivory tower writing very nice bits of academic research, but actually trying to understand what's going on out on the coalface and what challenges people are facing in their day jobs, and how our research might help address some of these things.
It's so interesting. I feel like I could talk to you for hours, but thank you so much for your insight, Alistair. That's been really, really interesting. And just for our listeners, if anybody wants to find out any more about your research, etc., have you got any links to anything that you would direct them to? I'll pop them in the video afterwards.
Yeah, they can find my university webpage with my publications on, or of course I'm on LinkedIn, although I'm not entirely sure why.
Oh, it's got good and bad sides, hasn't it? But that's a conversation for another time. Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and I hope everybody found that as insightful as I did.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Thanks.